Right, as President Trump walks back tariffs on most products from Mexico and Canada again, Canada says retaliatory tariffs will stay in place until that pause is permanent.
Hey everyone, welcome back to the channel. Today, we're diving deep into a major economic shift that's sending shockwaves through the trade relationship between the US and Canada. Could Canada's latest bold moves be a warning sign for the US economy? And what happens if Canada suddenly decides to cut off its energy supply? The answers might surprise you, so stick around until the end. Right now, a powerful wave of national pride is sweeping across Canada, unlike anything seen in recent years. From bustling city streets to small rural towns, Canadians are uniting under a common cause, reclaiming control over their economy and standing up against what they view as an imbalance in trade relations with the United States. Campaigns like "Canada is not for sale" are rapidly gaining traction, fueled by widespread concerns over increasing foreign influence on domestic industries. Social media is flooded with posts supporting the movement, and Canadian flags are being displayed with renewed enthusiasm across businesses, homes, and public institutions. But this surge of patriotism isn't just about symbols or slogans. It is translating into real economic actions that are directly impacting the US market. One of the most immediate effects is a major drop in travel to the US, particularly through Canadian airlines. Major carriers like WestJet and Air Canada have reported a staggering 25% decline in bookings for US destinations, forcing them to make drastic schedule adjustments, cut flight routes, and reconsider expansion plans. This sharp decline in Canadian tourism has already dealt a devastating $2.1 billion blow to the US economy, particularly affecting cities and states that depend heavily on cross-border travel. The impact goes beyond just numbers. An estimated 14,000 American jobs have already been lost due to this travel slowdown. Hotels, restaurants, and retailers that rely on Canadian visitors are feeling the pinch, with declining revenues forcing layoffs and business closures. This economic ripple effect is just beginning, and if tensions continue to escalate, the long-term consequences could be far more severe, reshaping the trade relationship between these two deeply connected economies. It's not just the airlines that are feeling the burn. The entire US service industry is experiencing a significant downturn due to the sudden drop in Canadian visitors. Hotels that once thrived on bookings from frequent Canadian travelers are now struggling to fill rooms, with some reporting occupancy rates plunging by as much as 30% in key tourist destinations. Cities like Las Vegas, New York, Miami, and Los Angeles, which typically attract thousands of Canadian tourists, are witnessing noticeable declines in business, leading to lower profits and potential job cuts. Restaurants, too, are feeling the effects. Many popular dining establishments, particularly those near border cities and major tourist hubs, have reported a sharp drop in reservations and walk-in customers. Restaurant owners are now facing difficult decisions, cutting hours, laying off workers, or even shutting down locations, as the loss of Canadian consumers eats into their bottom line. Retail businesses, especially those that rely on Canadian shoppers crossing the border to take advantage of American prices and product variety, are also suffering a drastic decrease in sales. Shopping malls in border states like Michigan, New York, and Washington have seen foot traffic decline, leading major brands to offer deeper discounts to entice customers. Even with these efforts, revenues remain significantly lower than in previous years. The ripple effect doesn't stop there. When tourism and retail sectors struggle, entire supply chains are disrupted, from food suppliers to transportation providers. With Canada actively reevaluating its economic relationship with the US, businesses that depend on this partnership could face even bigger financial challenges in the near future. If this trend continues, the long-term consequences for the US economy could be severe, reshaping industries that once relied on Canadian consumers. For decades, Canada and the US have been deeply connected through trade, with a staggering $1.2 trillion exchanged annually. Key sectors like energy, automotive, metals, and agriculture depend on this partnership. But what happens when that foundation begins to crack? Even small disruptions in trade can create a massive domino effect, driving up prices, limiting supply, and impacting thousands of American jobs. Here's a little-known fact that might surprise you. The US is incredibly dependent on Canadian energy, far more than most Americans realize. Canada supplies about 60% of US oil imports, making it the single largest foreign supplier of crude oil to the United States. Without this steady flow of Canadian oil, refineries across the country, especially in the Midwest and Gulf Coast, would struggle to maintain production levels, leading to severe fuel shortages and skyrocketing gas prices. But the reliance doesn't stop at oil. American industries are heavily dependent on Canadian natural gas for heating, electricity generation, and manufacturing. This is especially critical for northern states like Minnesota, Wisconsin, and Michigan, where brutal winter months demand a constant and affordable energy supply. Without Canadian natural gas, millions of households and businesses would face severe energy shortages, pushing heating costs to unaffordable levels. The connection runs even deeper. Canada is a major provider of hydroelectric power to several U.S. states, including New York and Vermont, helping to keep energy costs lower and ensuring a cleaner power grid. On top of that, Canadian uranium fuels U.S. nuclear power plants, which generate nearly 20% of America's electricity. This steady and reliable energy flow is the backbone of the U.S. economy, keeping industries running and homes heated. But here's the big question. What if Canada suddenly decided to shut the door on its energy exports? The consequences could be catastrophic, sending energy prices soaring, crippling industries, and disrupting millions of lives. The U.S. would be forced to scramble for alternative sources, but finding replacements wouldn't be easy or cheap. If Canada ever decided to cut the supply, the entire U.S. energy infrastructure could be thrown into crisis overnight. If Canada suddenly decided to cut off its energy exports, the United States would be thrown into an economic and industrial crisis unlike anything seen before. The sheer level of dependence on Canadian resources means that even a partial reduction in supply could send shockwaves across multiple sectors, leading to financial turmoil, job losses, and skyrocketing prices. Energy prices would skyrocket. Without a steady supply from Canada, the U.S. would have to rely more on expensive and unstable alternatives. Oil and gas prices would surge to unprecedented levels, affecting everything from the cost of heating homes to the price of gasoline at the pump. The burden would fall directly on American families, businesses, and manufacturers, leading to increased inflation across the board. The effects would be particularly devastating in northern states, where Canadian natural gas is essential for heating during the freezing winter months. Industries would collapse. Energy-intensive industries, such as steel manufacturing, chemical production, and automotive assembly, depend heavily on affordable Canadian energy. A sudden supply disruption would force companies to either cut back production, lay off workers, or shut down entirely. This could lead to the loss of hundreds of thousands of American jobs, further straining an already fragile economy. Power outages and fuel shortages could become more frequent, crippling the manufacturing sector and reducing America's global competitiveness. Supply chain chaos and market instability. The U.S. would scramble to find alternative sources of energy, but that process wouldn't be easy or quick. Severe shortages would result, triggering panic in financial markets and logistical nightmares in transportation and distribution networks. Meanwhile, Canada would likely attempt to reroute its energy exports to China, Europe, or other international buyers, but doing so would require years of investment in new infrastructure, making the transition slow and costly. Now, let's shift gears and talk about an even bigger shakeup: Canada's bold move at the NATO and EU summits. While the US has been busy fighting trade wars, Canada has been quietly working behind the scenes to strengthen its economic ties with Europe. Prime Minister Justin Trudeau made it clear, Canada is ready to compete with the US in global trade. Why is this such a big deal? Because Europe has been actively looking to diversify its supply chains, and Canada is stepping in as a stable, reliable alternative. With its modern manufacturing industry, abundant energy resources, and a booming aerospace sector, Canada is positioning itself as a direct competitor to the US. If European countries start shifting even just 5 to 10% of their trade from the US to Canada, that could cost the American economy billions of dollars every single year. And the worst part? The US might not have seen this coming. Now, Washington is at a crossroads and faces two tough choices: increase trade incentives to keep European partners tied to the US, economic pressure on Canada through tariffs or restrictions to slow down its momentum. But both of these options come with major risks. A strong reaction from the US could push Europe closer to Canada even faster, while doing nothing could gradually weaken America's global economic dominance. Here's another major development. In response to U.S. tariffs, Canadian consumers have launched a massive boycott against American products. Sales of U.S. goods in Canada have plummeted by nearly 20% in just 1 month. A whopping 85% of Canadian consumers now prefer locally made products. Grocery stores, retailers, and even car dealerships are prioritizing Canadian and international alternatives over American imports. And this isn't just a temporary trend. It's turning into a long-term economic shift. The movement is spreading beyond Canada, and the consequences for the U.S. are growing. European nations like Germany and France are actively reassessing their reliance on American products. China is capitalizing on the situation by strengthening trade ties with Canada and increasing imports of Canadian goods. Major American brands like Coca-Cola, Apple, and McDonald's are seeing their revenue decline in key markets as consumers turn away from U.S. products. The global trade landscape is shifting fast, and if the U.S. doesn't respond strategically, it could face lasting economic disruptions. So, what does all of this mean for the future? Canada is making calculated moves that could reshape the global trade system. With new economic alliances forming and consumer behavior rapidly evolving, the U.S. has to act fast, or risk losing its dominant position in global trade. Will Washington respond with aggressive trade policies? Or will Canada continue to carve out a bigger role in the global economy? One thing's for sure, this economic battle is far from over.